Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hey everybody, it's your host Bill Ellis on the What's the Point podcast, and today I've got another fabulous guest. Her name is Patty Block. Hello, Patty.
Good morning.
So grateful to have you here. I appreciate that. Patty is a business advisor who has turned her focus primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on helping to empower women business owners to better position themselves and gain their full value in the marketplace. Is that a fair assessment?
It is.
Okay, good. So we've got a good start. So Patty is also an author of a book called Your Hidden Advantage: Unlock the Power to Attract Right Fit Clients and Boost Your Revenue. That sounds good for anyone in business. Sounds good whether it's male or female.
Yes, which is why I wrote the book. It's been inside my head for a really long time, and I've been teaching the concepts in the book and decided I wanted to reach a broader audience and help more small business owners, and in particular women business owners.
Yeah, and I love that. And I especially love, Patty, that you realize that while your focus is on women, the basic principles that you bring forward are applicable to any business. And that's very similar to when I wrote the book, Women Who Won. My intent was, and my hope was, that it would be read by at least as many, if not more, males than females. So talk to me a little bit about how you've grown into this focus on women in business.
That really stemmed from a previous business that I owned. Many years ago, I was a political consultant and a lobbyist. I loved it. It was fascinating, and I'd never do it again. And during that business, my biggest frustration was that my revenue was tied to the election cycle. And in order to even out my revenue, I added the lobbying, which I was doing informally, and then became an independent lobbyist. And then, of course, the revenue was year-round, which was helpful, but the trade-off was travel. So I'm based in Houston, Texas, and our state capital is in Austin. So I was constantly commuting to Austin. I was doing some local and some federal lobbying as well. And I had 3 little kids at home, and that made it really challenging. So I was experiencing a lot of challenges as a woman business owner, especially with small children. And I all of a sudden looked up. I'm 35 years old. I have a thriving business, a wonderful family with these 3 little kids, and I had a surprise divorce. So everything turned upside down. And I quickly realized I needed to stop traveling to stabilize things for the kids. So that became my priority. So after 8 years of having that business, I closed it and got a job, because I knew that I needed health insurance, and I couldn't just go out and buy health insurance. And I needed a steady paycheck and to stop traveling. So that was the commitment that I made to myself and to my children. And at that time, my youngest was 2, and he just turned 31. So I have now raised my children, helped them all get through college, graduate school, launch their careers, and now they're all 3 business owners.
Well, that's fabulous. So it's interesting when you use the phrase a surprise divorce, and believe me, I don't want to get into that. But that does cause me to think that very often might be a differentiator to women, perhaps more so than men, in particular in the business world. Do you find that to be true? I mean, I know it was impactful for you to suddenly have to completely shift everything you're doing because you had the responsibility of the children.
Yes, and I always had the responsibility of the children, but I had financial assistance. And all of a sudden, with the divorce, I did not. So that was a huge change. I realized very quickly that I was not going to be able to count on child support, and in Texas, there was no alimony. So I was on my own, and which is why I decided I'm going to take this interim period and get a job, and I'll start my company again when the kids are older and more independent. And that is exactly what I did. I went to an international school here in Houston and became director of development and then director of operations. Was there for a little over 8 years and then started this company in 2006.
So let me ask you, when you made that decision, first of all, that's very contemplative and far-sighted, I think, to do what you have to do in the short term to accomplish what you want to do in the long term. And I'm going to come back to that concept later in the show. When you had that thought, were you thinking of restarting the same type of business, the lobbying and the political consulting, or were you just saying, I'll do something in the future?
That's a really great question. At the time, I was ready to leave the political arena.
Mm-hmm.
As a young woman, the sexual harassment and discrimination was really daunting. And I tolerated it for many years, and I was really getting tired of it. And the situation where you're in a position to compromise your ethics every day. And that was wearing me down. And I wasn't willing to compromise my ethics. And that's really difficult in politics, and certainly when you're lobbying. So that was wearing on me. The commuting and the traveling was wearing on me. So I had the ability to go back into political work, but I chose not to. And again, going back to your original thought about how I ended up doing the work that I currently do, and that was because as a woman business owner, I experienced so many challenges and realized there are thousands, maybe millions of women out there experiencing similar things. And I can help them because I've already addressed these issues and I've triumphed over many of those challenges. So when I started my company, the Block Group, in 2006, although I could have gone back into political work and I was asked to, there were many people who wanted me to continue that work. My heart wasn't in it. And I realized very quickly that where I wanted to focus was on helping other women business owners, especially those that are experts in their fields. So accountants, attorneys, engineers, trainers, people who have this high-achieving personality, much like I do, and who have honed their expertise over years and sometimes have come out of corporate careers. And they're experiencing a lot of challenges that we as women experience and as business owners. So that is where I shifted my focus and started building my business with that focus. And the business grew very nicely. I was very happy with it. And in 2018, decided to expand nationwide and go completely virtual, which was the best business decision I've ever made. And I started meeting people from all over the country, and I had a very specific strategy for how I was going to build the business.
Okay,
So
hold that thought just for a moment.
Yes,
Sorry
of
to
course.
interrupt, but we're traveling quickly here, and I don't want to lose some key points. So when you decided that you were ready to get back into starting your own business, and you were able to assess and come to the conclusion that what you had been doing was no longer going to be acceptable or something that your heart would be in, which I think is a very important point, because, on the show I talk about purpose fueling our passion. And if your purpose is to have your own business and be independent and make money and start to live the life you want to live, and it doesn't ignite a passion in you, then you have to try to take a different tact. So in this case, it's a great example, I think, Patty, of you had the same purpose, but you shifted, you evolved, which I talk about a lot. You evolved your purpose and you found something that triggered you. So when you started that, So you said you started that in 2006, I think, and then you said 2018 you went virtual. That's 12 years. First of all, how did you first dip your toe into the waters of coaching slash advising slash consulting, and did you start with the focus on women?
So at the international school, I was the director of operations. And while working with women was in my heart and what I wanted to focus on, bringing that experience in finance and operations to the small business market was another big motivator for me. So I knew what I wanted to do. When I first started, I worked with both men and women, didn't really make a distinction, and I went back to my contacts in the political arena and
Okay.
built my network because my network was still existing and I still had a lot of those relationships. So that's how I got started in 2006 and was working to bring that operational piece to the small business market and really functioning as an outsourced chief operating officer. So for 2 years, I focused on that and really understood that I was working towards working only with women business owners. And after the first 2 years, I made that shift, especially in my marketing and my messaging.
Did you know that consciously, Patty, or was that just something that kind of came as a feeling? Or I mean, did you consciously decide I'm moving to focus almost exclusively on women?
I did. I did. And part of it was paying attention to what I was feeling. And when I worked with a female client, I felt jazzed. I felt excited. And again, we're speaking the same language. So I really understand to the core of my being what they're afraid of, what they're worrying about, how they're dealing with their anxiety, all of those internal things that can keep us stuck. So that was a big part of it. And I enjoyed working with the gentlemen that I worked with, but I had some who didn't want to take financial advice from me because I was a woman. And again, I tolerated that in the political arena, and I was not willing to tolerate that in my business. So from that past experience, I realized this is not working for me. If they're not going to take financial advice from me strictly because I'm female, having nothing to do with my education or experience, then we aren't speaking the same language. And I'm not going to be able to have the impact that I intend to have. So it was a very conscious move on my part.
Good. And again, that just is a further dive into the fact that you, and everyone listening, and everyone not listening, can even further evolve and refine. Refine is maybe a better word. Refine their purpose. So that was an important point. Thank you. So that grew, and then in 2018, prior to pandemic virtual world, you decided to go virtual. How did that work for you?
So I started by upgrading my technology. Prior to that, I had clients in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and I was doing a tremendous amount of driving, which to me was so inefficient. So that was part of my motivation was I want to stop traveling and stop driving everywhere and focus on helping more people. And so that was a big motivator. And I started researching and upgrading all my technology. And I remember I used to have to teach people how to use Zoom, which now seems so funny given the pandemic, given that everyone has gone virtual and was working from home. So the transition became very quick, whereas in 2018 and 2019, some of my local clients were hesitant to go virtual, and they much rather would meet in person. But once the pandemic happened, I wasn't scrambling because I already had transitioned everybody to virtual, and all my new clients, that was the only way I worked with them. So I was fortunate in that sense because a lot of my clients were scrambling when the lockdown started in 2020. And that gave me the bandwidth to focus on helping them and not having to worry about my own business because I was already virtual.
And that was taking care of itself. It's interesting that you said you had to educate a lot of people on Zoom because, in my experience, Zoom came as part of the pandemic. I mean, I don't know how many people were even aware of Zoom prior to that, but boy, Zoom just exploded. And just on a side note, as many issues as some people say they had, and some still have with Zoom, for that company and that platform to be able to expand its bandwidth literally and figuratively to the level that it did as fast as it did is a whole business case that I hope someone's looking at because I'd like to read it. I don't want to do the research, but I'd like to read how it happened. So that's pretty incredible. Yeah, good foresight on your part. How has that been working since the pandemic seems to have eased? Are people now saying they want to get back in person, or are they completely comfortable with Zoom and virtual?
All my clients are completely comfortable with it, and now I have clients across the country, so we don't have that option, right? I'm not going to travel across the country. Again, it's not a good use of my time, and there's no need. So all the work that I do is virtual, and it's been working extremely well, and it's really made it so there's no geographic restriction to who I can work with and who I can help.
So now here's an interesting question for you. Let me step back. You claim to be a Texan, though you weren't born in Texas, but you say that you moved there as quickly as you could and moved to Texas when you were 4. How much of an influence did you really have on your move to Houston when you were 4?
Zero.
I know.
Zero. And so I was born in Michigan. My parents grew up in Detroit, and my dad was an orthopedic surgeon who was in the military. So he was stationed in Texas, and that's how we ended up moving here. But once he got here, he said to my mom, "We are never going back because I'm never going to go through a Michigan winter again." So they ended up staying in Texas, and I'm so grateful because it was a wonderful place to grow up. And of course, I went to college in Austin at UT and then moved to Houston. And there is a lot of opportunity in Texas. You know, there's good and bad no matter where you live, and there's politics no matter where you live. But in general, Texas is really a wonderful place to raise children and a wonderful place to build your business.
Good. And that sounds like the lobbyist in you coming out, but I know you're genuine when you say that. But back to what I was going to say, you are now, you don't have geographic restrictions. Has your client base expanded to the international world?
Yes, although a lot of the concepts that I'm teaching are more U.S. centric. And while a lot of them can apply to people internationally, I have not put my focus on that. There's a huge market just in Texas. So once I expanded to multiple states and I picked 6 strategic cities that I wanted to build my business in, and as I've been doing that, of course, it's opened so many more doors. So yes, I certainly can work with people internationally, but my focus has been national.
And your focus is, that's a great word based on what you said. It's interesting to me that you focused on, I think you said 6 specific cities. Do you care to name those, or at least what drove you to those cities? What commonality or what potential did they have?
You bet. You can probably tell from a lot of what I'm sharing is that I'm very strategic and very focused and very intentional. Now, that's not to say that I always choose the right strategy for me. Sometimes I go down a path that is not working as well, and I'll shift and I'll re-strategize. But I'm always working from a strategy. And so I picked 6 strategic cities. And the reason I did that is, first of all, U.S. is gigantic. So you can't develop business everywhere. And I wanted to build meaningful relationships. To me, it doesn't make sense to be handing out business cards. And that's not the way I work. So that meant I needed to take it in bite-sized pieces. So I chose Denver, Chicago. I chose Los Angeles, but it turned out Los Angeles was not a very good place to start. And so I shifted to East Coast and now have developed business in New Jersey, New York in particular. And that has actually been a better strategy for me. The reason I picked Midwest is there is a Midwest sensibility. And there is a warm, welcoming business community, especially in Denver and Chicago, that's very similar to the business community in Houston. And I often say Houston is the biggest small town in America because we all know each other. Even though it's a gigantic city, the business community, when you build relationships, you get to know people. And in fact, I am most shocked when I'm introduced to somebody new in Houston and we've both been here for a long time, but we haven't met. That's typically shocking to me. So that is my experience in Denver. And of course, I've expanded to other cities in Colorado and the same thing in Chicago. And I've expanded to other cities around Chicago. And that is through a very specific networking strategy that has worked really well for me.
Well, good. And are you willing to share your networking strategy with the listeners here?
You
and
bet.
if it's something that's exclusive to your book or your business, I understand.
No, I'm happy to share it. The way I started was by networking in Houston or Texas with the people that I had already built relationships with and asked them for specific introductions into those cities. And was very transparent. I said, this is what I'm doing. This is why I want to build business in Colorado, starting with Denver. And here's who I'm looking to meet. And it was usually other expert service providers. And I often prefaced it by saying, I'm looking for people who understand about building relationships, and we're not going to have a one-time conversation. I want to get to know these people, not just as business people. And I'm looking for people who are generous and kind and giving. That's how I operate, and that's who I want to surround myself with. So asking for those very specific introductions, I started meeting people in all these different cities. And I will say it's very time intensive. So if you use this type of strategy, I think you have to be pretty dedicated to stick with it. But I will also say it's tons of fun because you meet so many diverse people across the country, and you see the commonalities and you see the differences. And ultimately, we're all working towards similar goals in terms of building our businesses.
Well, I think that's very sound advice, and I appreciate you sharing it with myself and the listeners. But you've also said something that I think is important, and that is building a relationship takes time. And from that relationship, great things will grow. Is that it? That's how it's worked for you,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So let's move on here because I want to talk to you specifically about your book, which again is called Your Hidden Advantage, Unlock the Power to Attract Right Fit Clients and Boost Your Revenue. So there's a lot just in the title and the subtitle. So we'll get to that. Let's start with this. How do you define right fit clients?
The challenge is that for many of us, we lean into what we think we should be doing instead of what we really want to be doing. And especially for women, this is a huge challenge. So when we talk about right fit clients or right fit strategy, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, and realizing sometimes the strategy I've selected isn't working so well and having to shift, all of that right fit has to mean it's right fit for you. It doesn't matter if it's right fit for somebody else. And it really doesn't matter what somebody else is doing. So while I'm happy to share my strategies and answer any questions you may have, it doesn't mean that strategy is going to work for every one of your listeners. And right fit means figuring out what you want and how you're going to achieve it. And that's very much what I teach, is how do you figure out what's right for you? And some of that is through experimentation and trying certain things. Now, if you can try things that have been proven, have a track record, and have worked well, either for you or for others, that is a step up, right? From just starting from ground level and experimenting until you figure out what works. So sometimes you can have that advantage of using proven strategies and putting those to work. But you still have to experiment to figure out what's the right fit for you. And no one can tell you that. So that is that. I also think that's a hallmark of being a business owner. Entrepreneurs understand that you need to experiment and refine your offers or who you choose to work with. So to me, that's what right fit means. And that is also what I teach in the book.
Okay. I appreciate that. And it's very, very clear. And I asked you about finding right fit clients first, because I think that then sets up the bigger picture of the book, which is your hidden advantage. To be able to find right fit clients, and you just talked about this so beautifully, Patty, you have to know what your advantage is. And it's got to be a fit to us. So how does your book help people to unlock, and embrace their hidden advantage?
So the challenge is that even if you, so this goes back a moment ago, I said no one can figure it out for you.
Right.
It's not like there's a magic recipe and that once you have that recipe, you have no problems. That's not how business works. So it's figuring out the recipe that's right for you. And then that secret ingredient is really about what is your advantage and why is it hidden? So I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I asked people, what are the attributes that you think I bring to my clients that make me valuable to them as a business advisor, as a pricing expert? And then I would do the same for my accountability partner. I would write down all the things that I thought were of value that they brought to their clients. And one of the things at the top of the list when we exchanged our lists was that I was very calm and I had a very calming voice. I then took that information, that surprised me that that was on the list and that it was number one on the list. And I then took it and tested it. And I asked my clients and my colleagues, I said, this really surprised me and this was on my list. What do you think? And every one of them said, oh yeah, absolutely. You're always calm. You're always, I know I can call if I'm freaked out and you're going to calm me down and you're going to share a different perspective. And that's really valuable to me. And I kept hearing that over and over. So I never thought of my voice or my demeanor as being an advantage, but others see that. So my hidden advantage is really about finding that insight that I can listen to someone explain their challenge to me. I can distill that, analyze it, and give them very valuable advice in a very short period of time. That is my hidden advantage. And part of that is my demeanor and my voice and my ability to share a different perspective. No one could tell me what my hidden advantage is. I had to figure it out. And that's what I teach in the book, is how do you go about figuring out what your advantage is. And there are clues all around you. If you've ever been complimented on something and you've kind of brushed it off and you've said, oh, but that's so easy for me. Of course of course I can do that. That's just so simple for me. Well, things that are simple for you are typically difficult for your clients. That's
Right.
why they need you. And if that is something unique, that could be your hidden advantage. And I've worked with lots and lots of women in particular where we figure out what their hidden advantage is, and it's so exciting. It's sometimes surprising to them, but what I dive into in the book is, why is that advantage hidden? Why might it be hidden from you? And why is it hidden out in the world? And there's a lot of psychology behind that, and part of it is the way we are raised, especially as girls and women, that we're raised not to talk about ourselves. And that if we do talk about ourselves, it's considered bragging. And that means that our advantage is often hidden. And here in Texas, we say, if you feel like it's bragging, it's not bragging if it's true.
Right.
And
So-
it is true for everyone that I work with.
Yeah.
They have these unique advantages.
And I think based on what you've said and my experience, that perhaps as often as not, our advantages, male or female, our advantages are hidden up to a point because we don't have an awareness of them and we don't have an appreciation for them. You talked about people being told you're good at this and saying, oh yeah, but it's easy, so they discount it. Well, that would be like Michael Jordan saying, well, yeah, basketball's easy for me. Well, yeah, you're the best that's ever played. So a lot of times we take for granted what our advantages are because it doesn't take a lot of effort. And what we focus on are things that take more effort, it seems. So that's why I loved what you said about you sought outside advice, because that's what you do for a living. That's what I do for a living. And that's what we all need, is someone outside of us that's going to give us some things to consider. So the other thing you said that you are the only person that can define your hidden advantage, I think is how you said it. But you did that by being open to taking a lot of outside data and looking at it and evaluating it. And I think that's a critical step. And I think that's often what advisors do well, like you said, is to be able to look at something and say, have you thought of this? And then to get people to believe it.
Absolutely. And that's a real challenge. Part of the challenge, too, is if you take it for granted that something is easy for you, you are less likely to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And if you're not talking about it, then others can't know. They can't read your mind, and they can't know the skills that you have, the way you think, the way you communicate, the way you interact with people. They're just not going to know if you don't help them see that.
Yeah, so now I'm going to take your title and subtitle and go back to the end. So I started with the start of the subtitle, went to the title, now the end of the subtitle. And this is where knowing our advantage is critical, because it's unlock the power to attract right fit clients and boost your revenue. And that has to be because, and I'll ask you to elaborate on this, but that has to be because we suddenly know what our value is. Our hidden advantage is our value, and knowing that it's valuable to others is, I think, key. Am I interpreting that correctly?
You are, and I'm going to take it one step further, which is regarding your pricing. So I work with service companies, and it feels often like we're picking numbers out of thin air, that it's completely arbitrary what we're charging. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to feel that way. So what I help people do is build their pricing model. And it is based on the value that you're bringing to your clients. And we do a lot of analysis and research, and we're not picking numbers out of thin air. And when it doesn't feel arbitrary, when you have a rationale behind your pricing model, then you start to feel more confident. And in fact, every piece of what I teach is building your confidence And that is a place where you feel excited to talk about yourself, your value, your pricing, the results you get for your clients. And you no longer feel that terrible anxiety that you have when you're speaking with a prospect. You don't feel like you need to offer an invisible discount. And by that, I mean, often we're giving discounts that nobody asked for. And
So
and I
true.
call them invisible discounts because often your buyer doesn't even know that you're offering them a discount. But you get that clutch feeling and that terrible anxiety that you won't get the work if you don't reduce your price. And that is a trap. So
Yes.
I teach people how to avoid that trap by building your pricing model and becoming very confident in how you talk about that.
So everyone listening, make sure that you buy the book Your Hidden Advantage by Patty Block, because her keys to this successful formula are in that book. So two things quickly. First of all, when you're talking about finding your hidden advantage and accepting some things that we may not think are truly unique or valuably unique to us, it makes me think of my definition of humility, which is very simply we have to accept every negative thing about ourselves, but exactly as it is, without sloughing it off and without exaggerating it. But we also have to do that with our positives. We have to take it exactly as it is without discounting it or saying, oh, it's easier for me, it's nothing for me, and without embellishing it, saying, oh, I'm the best there ever was. So that's trying to find that true self-awareness sounds to me like it's at the heart of what you're talking about. But now I want to get into something different, and it's something you've talked about that I find intriguing, and it's the broken cookie effect. And I love
Yes.
cookies, so talk to me.
When I was growing up, my mom made these fabulous cookies. The whole house smelled good. It was warm. The cookies were gooey. And all my life, I watched my mom eat the broken cookies. But it wasn't until I was a teenager that I even thought to ask her, why do you only eat the broken cookies? Do they taste better? And she laughed and said, no, I eat the broken cookies so you can have the whole ones. And this memory came rushing back to me not too long ago when I was struggling to find language to describe a pattern that I had seen in the almost 20 years I've been working with women business owners. And I realized this image of my mom eating the broken cookies popped in my head. And I realized that's what we as women have been doing is we pay attention to our role models, our moms and our grandmothers, and their spirit of self-sacrifice. And we end up bringing that into our business. And what I had observed all these years was that we undervalue ourselves, we underprice our services, and then we overdeliver. So our profit goes poof. And that's what I call the broken cookie effect. And it is a great entree to help women understand this particular dynamic and how that may be keeping them stuck. Because if they're pricing artificially low and they might not be working with the right clients for them, and because again, they're taking anyone who comes to them, and they're over-delivering. I've never met a woman who isn't over-delivering on her service. Then they have a really tough time being profitable and consistently profitable. So that is why I developed not only the broken cookie effect, which is the problem, but the solution, which I talk about in the book, is called the SNAP system. Excuse me. And SNAP is like ginger snap. And it stands for stop believing the myths, narrow your focus, assess your value, and practice your power. And all 4 steps are equally important in boosting your revenue, working with those right fit clients, and finding more joy in your business. So that is the outcome, is more revenue, more choices, and more joy.
Okay,
And
so everyone listening, rewind your tape or video about a good 90 seconds or so and listen to that again, because I find Snap to be incredibly powerful. And again, it's in the book. So yeah, that's really cool. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it was just so important. I didn't want Snap to be just a Snap thought and have people go by it. I want people to really listen to that because it's powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really, if you can't tell, I love what I do and I love what I teach. I love the people I work with. And all of that is so meaningful to me. When I wrote the book, and this is my first book, so I was learning a lot as I was writing it, as well as my first foray into publishing. And so I've really enjoyed that whole process. But when I get feedback from women that this is a game changer, that they never thought about it in this way, and they didn't think about their business in this way, and that it's really changed their perception, that's what fills my heart and really gets me excited, because that was why I wrote the book in the first place.
Well, good. That's fabulous. So the broken cookie effect, you have something that's the broken cookie quiz, which everyone can take. It'll be in the show notes, but go ahead and get your pencils out, listeners, because you can go to brokencookie.com, brokencookie.com, and find out a lot more about both the effect and how you engage in that effect. So just for clarity, the solution to the broken cookie effect is not to give all the crumbs to your customers, right?
Yes, and it's also not for you to be living on crumbs. And
Exactly.
that's the challenge, is that everybody around you gets the whole cookie and you live on crumbs. And that is a huge struggle for small business owners. So we want to make sure that you get the whole cookie as well. It's not limited. You can have the whole cookie and you can share that with everyone around you. But there are several steps that you need to put into place in order for that to happen.
And that's what you address in your book.
Yes.
And that's part of the SNAP solution.
Right, the SNAP system. And I wanted to offer your audience, in addition to taking the Broken Cookie quiz, you can also go to yourhiddenadvantage.com, and I have some bonuses there, including a training called the Value Equation, and those are companion pieces for the book. So if you'd like to do that, it's yourhiddenadvantage.com.
Outstanding. Thank you. And again, as always, that'll be in the show notes. Patty, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you sharing. I've got two more questions for you. And the first is what we've talked about from my perspective, which I think should be very clear as a male perspective. I've been able to take everything you've said and find relevance in it. What do you find to be the most significant differences, both good and or bad, from the female perspective that keeps you in such demand working with female business owners?
I think communication challenges. I think that is the biggest stumbling block. The women that I work with have no problem calculating and creating a pricing model. They have very little problem defining, and then we go out and find their ideal buyers. They are a little stuck on the myths. The first step in the SNAP system is stop believing the myths. And we get stuck on that, but they can work through it. The challenge is, how do you talk about yourself, your business, your services, your solutions, your results? And as women, we have not been taught or encouraged to do that. And so, and in fact, in many cases, we have strong powers of intuition and perception, and we're actively taught to suppress that in a corporate environment. And so many of us, of course, started our careers by working in a corporate environment where we're taught not to be emotional, not to check our gut, not to trust our intuition, not to trust ourselves in many situations. And so then we start our businesses, we build our businesses, and we still behave the same way. And so that limited vocabulary, limited ability to communicate, and limited confidence to communicate really keeps us stuck. And that is a big difference because for most men, they have not been raised that way. And they have not been taught to suppress some of their emotions and their powers in a corporate environment. So when they go out and start their own businesses, they don't have that same roadblock that a lot of women do. And especially as technical experts, a lot of times we have trouble finding the right words, just like I did when I kept seeing this pattern that I ended up naming the broken cookie effect. Mm-hmm. I didn't have the words and the language to describe what I was seeing so that I could help other women see it. And when the broken cookie effect was born is when other women started really understanding the point that I was making, mm-hmm. and that you don't have to just live with that. You can change it, and a great way to start is by reading Your Hidden Advantage.
Yeah, and I encourage all of the listeners to read it, male and female. I had said 2 questions, but you just created another question in my mind, and again, wanting to be respectful of your time, this may be an elongated answer. What are your solutions, recommendations? What is your advice to women when they do run up against, and it's not just the political lobbying field, as you well know, it's every field, when they run into what I'm going to call bias against females, where it's you're treated like, oh, that's cute little girl, but stay over there, and I shouldn't be saying that. You explain it. But what remedy or what solution, what advice do you give?
It's such a great question, and I'm smiling because I have dealt with this my whole life. All my clients have dealt with this. Find better clients. Find clients who value you. Find clients, they're out there. There is a price point for every buyer. And we've seen that over and over. You see that in the retail market between Walmart, Macy's, and Neiman Marcus. Which woman shops in which shop depends on how much money she has and what she values, what she thinks is important. And I'm typically a Macy's shopper, and so are my clients. The key is surround yourself with people who understand your value. They're out there, but you need to find them. And stop waiting for the phone to ring. Because if you're only waiting for people who find you, it limits everything you can do, and you are less likely to find people who value you. So that is what I recommend. Surround yourself, your colleagues, your family, your clients, surround yourself with people who understand your value. And in order for them to understand your value, you have to be able to talk about it. And you have to be able to do that with confidence. So that's, it's a very circular solution. It goes in a circle. And mm-hmm. the more confident you are, the more substance you have underneath that confidence, you're not bragging. You're not being arrogant. You're talking about the real value that you bring mm-hmm. to the world. And it's super important because more people of substance need to be heard, and because you are a valuable member of your community, and talking about it helps others see that.
Mm-hmm. So I think you've just gotten me back down to 2 questions, because you just beautifully answered what is always my ending question, and that is, what's the point? And I think you just summarized that very well without having had the question answered, or asked rather. But I will just say, is there anything you want to add to that, what's the point, even though I think you just nailed it?
The point to me is meaning, is creating meaning in every aspect of my life. and creating impact. And I know that's an overused word, but it's meaningful to me because I think we all want to feel as though what we're doing is meaningful to others, that we are helping people, that we care about other people. And again, that communication piece is so important because people won't know unless you can communicate that. So what's the point? It's having an impact and for others to understand the meaning and the value that you bring to the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Patty Block, business advisor, focusing primarily on women entrepreneurs, but advice that is relevant to anyone and everyone in business and not in business, in my opinion. The book, Find Your Hidden Advantage, is available and in the show notes. Patty, thank you for your time, for your experience, and for your insights. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.